Jennifer asked me to be here. First of all, I'd like to give admonishment to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who, without him, I wouldn't be able to be up here today. Not much of a singer, but after the wonderful, wonderful testimony prior, I have a little something on my heart. So if you help me sing it, starts off, we fall down, but we get up. We fall down, but we get up. We fall down, but we get up. For a saint is just a sinner who fell down, but got right back up. Thank y'all for helping me sing that this morning, getting that off my heart. My story it's a little colorful, to say the least. I guess the best place to start is my hometown, Baltimore City. I started there 1980, stayed there probably till middle school. My mom, single mother, raising 4 children by herself. My father was abusive, alcoholic, who didn't support us very much, but my mom, she was committed to taking care of her children, and I thank you to all the mothers that have that commitment in their heart to care for your children, even when the odds are stacked up against you. My mom, she wanted something more for me, so eventually she sent me down to down to Calvert County during middle school with my grandparents, William and Teon Plater, who were down here their entire lives. They raised 7 sons, and they decided to take me on for my mother. My mother, she didn't want Baltimore City to have me, so she said we had to get them out of Baltimore City. She said I had a good mind. She was just a little worried what happened with that good mind in Baltimore City. Amen. And so she sent me down here. My grandparents, they raised me. Pretty good student. Found out that I was really good at sports somehow. I never had any coaching, so once I received some coaching and a little bit of tutelage, it kind of took off with me. Even down here, my dad would come down here quite often. As I said, he was abusive alcoholic, so me and him, we would get in altercations. When he came to the house, we would get into fights because I figured I had to protect my grandparents. And after I got certain size, it was just me and him going at it. And so many nights I would have to fight him on the weekends, then go to school Monday morning, and I would have to perform. But that same type of animosity and anger that I had towards him, I would use that on the field, on the court, on the track, and that seemed to accelerate my abilities at that time. Eventually, it got to the point where, without having too much of guidance, I decided to, towards the end of school, I decided to go on my own way. I had a couple offers to go to different schools. I would visit them, and eventually I got to the point where I just said, I don't want to go to school, I want to do my own thing. And that's one of the things that I work on with what I do. I try to help young men plan themselves out a little better, because after the sports stop, after the music stopped playing, they seem to, with all that masculine energy and testosterone, they seem to really don't know what to do with themselves. And so I ran with the wrong crowd. I was never one to, I had to be the leader. I don't like taking orders too much. And my grandmother, she said, so one day you're going to have to listen to somebody, son. I said, well, I listen to myself, because I seem to make the most sense. And I started doing my own thing. And doing your own thing as a young man, I worked. I always loved to work. But I ran with the wrong crowd, or led the wrong crowd. And eventually in 2005, fast forward to 2005, I eventually got into a fight with a young man in my front yard, and I hurt him pretty bad. He received substantial injuries, and he ended up going into a coma. And I remember in the situation, I remember praying I said to the Lord, I spoke to my grandmother, and I had evaded the law for a little bit. She told me, you're going to have to turn yourself in. I said, well, they're going to have to catch me. And eventually I turned myself in, but I remember praying while he was in a coma, Lord, just spare his life. I don't ask you for much. I don't see much out of his life. I said, but I don't want to be a murderer. I don't want that on my hands. And a little bit after praying that prayer, he woke up out of the coma. And, it was one of those things to where the doctor said, we don't know if he's going to wake up. We don't think he's going to wake up. But if he do, he won't be much of himself. Well, the young man made a full recovery. I was sentenced to 18 years in prison because of it. And the judge said, she said, had it not been with your hands, you might have been better off, But being it was with your hands, that made it more, the word she used was intimate. And, I didn't understand that. I had known people who had shot people. I had known people who had stabbed people. I just wasn't understanding it. And when she gave me the 18 years, I asked my attorney, I said, did she say years? I said, people fight all the time. And my attorney looked at me, she said, not like this, Teon. When we got in the back, I said, all right. I said, well, let's get this started so I can get it over with. And it didn't dawn on me, really, in going through the transition, going into prison. You start at the county, then you go to the state level. And it didn't really dawn on me that I was in prison until, I want to say, 4 or 5 months into the incarceration. They had put me in a cell with a guy who had life. And I remember his words, on the way in there, there was the unit that they put me on, it was already on lockdown. And I said, well, I thought we were in jail. I mean, why are we locked down, locked up and locked down? I said, 2 negatives supposed to equal a positive. I said, this doesn't make sense. And he said, shorty, not a lot of things gonna make sense on this ride. He said, just hold on. And watching them shake down our unit, and there was a laundry bin that they had coming through there, and the thing was halfway full of knives. It had to be halfway full of knives. And I was like, well, how does everybody get knives in prison? I said, and did I miss something when they gave me my bed stuff? I said, how does everyone have all these knives? And he said, that ain't even half of them. But we came off, and immediately once we came off in the yard, I went out into the yard, and there was a guy who was a boxer, and he was there. And they stabbed him 27 times. And the guy, he looked at me, he said, see, not a lot of things make sense. He said, we going back to lockup. I said, this is just crazy. And he explained to me, he said, if you're good with your hands, they already know. He said, keep your nose clean, keep your head straight. He said, because they're not going to fight you, they're going to stab you. And when we did come off lockdown, I ended up meeting another gentleman who had 7 years, but he had been there for 27. And I said, how is it that you've been here 27 years and you only had 7 years initially? He said, sometimes you got to defend yourself. And he said, they don't care who started it. They don't care who finished it. He said, all they did was keep adding on my time because I kept fighting. And he said, you seem like a fighter. He said, let the Lord fight for you. And I moved from one spot in the Department of Corrections to the next spot. All along the way, I kept my nose clean. And I ended up spending 6 years in prison. And to quote the words of Malcolm X or Sharif Shabazz Ali, he said, I don't think that there was a man who got more out of 6 years of prison than me. And those instances, a lot of times you feel like that. Eventually, I went back in front of the judge, and her words were, and I quote, "I didn't expect to ever see you again." She said, "But here you are." And the only condition that I had on me getting released, and it was one of those things, they put the condition on you because they know you're not going to be able to do it. She told my attorney, "I want him to come back in front of me without having put his hands on anybody." And she said she only said it because she know you can't do it. I said, "Well," I said, "Tell her don't hold her breath." I said, "I'll be back." And sure enough, she said, "I bet on you not to ever see you again." And so they gave me leniency, and they took back the time. During the time that I was there in 2009, the young man whom I got into the altercation with, he got murdered in Forestville. And, even while there, I said, I don't even have a victim any longer. And, he's been gone for 10 years, but not a day that it goes by that I don't think about that young man or the impact that I might have had on his decision-making that led up to him being murdered. I got to the point where one time while I was locked up, if you're not in a gang, they'll put you in a gang. People you talk to or associate with, they put two and two together, and they say, "Well, you're in a gang." And so eventually they did a sweep, and they put me in isolation. And I kept asking, why am I in isolation? What's going on? Well, they had me in about 5 gangs. They said I was the Blood. They said I was a Crip. They said I was Dead Man Incorporated. And DMI, that's an all-Caucasian gang. And I said to the guy, I said, well, I can't be. I said, the rules are you can't be in that gang. So I made a few calls. Well, I didn't make a few calls, but I got word to somebody, and state legislator, Senator Benson, she got in touch with the federal John Fountain, who's in charge of investigation for gangs and stuff like that, and he called. And when he called, the institution was so upset with me. They said, who are we dealing with? Because here's the guy in charge of it for the entire country. He calls this little place and says, immediately take them off. I got a praying grandmother. Amen. Amen. And even to this day, I still function and I live on that prayer equity, even though she's gone. And while I was in isolation, see, God doesn't do anything just for no reason, just to do it. While I was in isolation, I recall saying to the Lord, I don't know what to do with all of this. I said, sure, I'll make it to where I said I was going to go. I'll get the reconsideration, but then what do I do after that? And in a small voice, he spoke to me. And he said, well, you hurt somebody with your hands, then you can heal somebody with your hands. And when I came off a lockup, I got a book. And I read the word, and I got into the word, and the word says, write it down and make it plain. Amen. So I started writing down what I wanted. And I said, well, I'm going to work as a physical therapist. And I knew I had to go through a certain amount of school in order to be a physical therapist. That would have been another 6 years at least. And so I said, until I become the physical therapist, I said I'll work in the scope of that environment and I'll be a personal trainer. And so while I was there with Faith, I went ahead and got my first personal training license while I was still incarcerated. Wow. I went ahead and trusted the Lord for what he wanted. And I would pray all the time. I would say, Lord, well, I don't have transportation. I don't have housing. I said, you know all the numbers. I'm going to need you to take care of that for me. And I trusted that. Okay. And I wrote down I wanted to be the best at certain things. Fast forward to 2012, I got to meet a gentleman, Bernie Fowler Jr., and there was a work detail once I came back down to Calvert. It was with the detention center down here. And the work detail was the only one that was left. And Lieutenant came to me and he said, well, I know you don't want to be sitting around and there's this work detail, but I said, but what? He said, it's on a farm. I said, absolutely not. I said, we're not doing farms. I said, no. I said, it's just bad stuff associated with me being on a farm. And he said, all right. He said, well, I tried. He said, I knew you wouldn't want to do it. And I went back to the bunk and I sat down and I heard that small voice again say, you still haven't learned just yet. Small, son, just small. I get up, I go back to the lieutenant. I go, man, I'll take that detail. And I just leave out. And he comes back, he said, you sure? I said, I'm sure. He said, it's on a farm. I said, I know, I'll do it. I'll do it. And that's where I got to meet Bernie Fowler. Initially, there was, we worked with Chesapeake Church in Hunger. And the vision that Bernie had was a little bit larger, and so in Hunger and Bernie Fowler separated. And I know I talked to Bernie all along the way. I said, well, you got to do your own thing. If this is your vision, then you got to keep pushing with your vision. And he started Farming for Hunger. He's not here today. The table's over there, relatively empty. I'm here. He's doing a TED Talk. I said, Bernie, you got to do a TED Talk. I said, it's a TED Talk. You know, he was like, well, you know, I want to be there. I said, it's a TED Talk. I said, trust me, they'll understand. And the two individuals that he was going to have sit at the table last night, Rico, his mother had to go to Washington Hospital Center, so keep her in your prayers. And his relief, Rachel, who was going to do the second part of the day, she had to go to the hospital for a serious bout with pneumonia, so keep her in your prayers also. In meeting Bernie, we started digging potatoes out of the ground. I hated every bit of it. I was like, Bernie, there's got to be a better way. I was like, but all along the way, I've seen the transformations and things made, and eventually he said to me, he said, you're intelligent. He said, you're kind-hearted, you're handsome. He said, is there anything that you want to do? Because I'm happy to help you out. I'd be honored if you would work for me. And he was building homes at the time. I said, well, I don't want to do construction no more. I said, my grandfather had told me to use my mind. I said, that's what I'm set to do. And I said, I got a personal training license when I was there. And I said, I plan to become a physical therapist eventually. And he said, well, I know a gentleman that owns some gyms and may owe me a favor or two. And the day I got out, I met with Bernie. He said, I tried to call the guy. He's not answering. He said, if he doesn't answer, we'll go by his office. If he doesn't answer, then we'll go by his house. And I'm like, well, I just got out of prison. I was like, he's not just going to take me to this guy's house. And eventually, the guy walks in the restaurant where we're at. And he says, I know you've probably been trying to call me. He said, if this is the young man, he said, come over to my office after y'all are done eating lunch. And when I was done, he took me over there. They went in the room. And I'll never forget it. They called me in a little bit later. He said, shut the door. And he said, sit down. And he said, if this man to your right says you're A+, you're A+ in my book, welcome to World's Gym. Wow. And that's without filling out an application. He said, I don't care about your background. I don't care what happened. I don't care what you did. He said, if he say you're A+, He said, because I would never be the person I am unless he took care of me. And when I found out the story that Bernie had given him the opportunity to have his own gyms, he just felt like paying it back.
That's amazing.
Today, I'm in the electric union, but that's not my passion. My real passion is being able to help people see their promise through the things they eat, through their physical conditioning. And if I could, I'm trying to figure out a way to just be able to give it all away. I study relentlessly when it comes to it. And I see the need for our church, for the Christian community to focus more on what they consume. I get a chance sometimes to go to temples and things like that, and I see everybody there, Muslims and everybody, they just are intact physically. You know, and if you're attacked physically, it helps you mentally. You're not distracted so much, the chemicals and things, they keep you off balance. And I look at their dietary, and there's a reason why God gave a dietary law in Leviticus about what we should eat.
That's right.
There's a reason why in the book of Daniel, I see a lot of churches, they do the Daniel fast, but they always stop at the 21 days, but they don't realize that after 21 days, the king changed the entire kingdom diet, so to speak, to Daniel's and his heritage. And I see that, and I look at what we consume and our lack of activity as a church, and it's alarming. So a lot of the sicknesses, people tell me, I'm in the union, so guys, they're not so healthy. They say, well, if I'm gonna go, I'm gonna go. I said, no, you can rush your time. You can rush it. And when it comes to your health, this is your temple. You get to do this one time. You get to do it one time. So I always look at my son. I have a 5-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter also. And I always tell him, with my son, I always say, do everything with what? He says, with purpose. I say, you do what with purpose? He says, I wake up with purpose. I eat with purpose. And I try to get them from early off to make good decisions concerning their health. And I encourage everyone to work on taking in. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be the foods you eat, but the things you listen to, the things you see. All of this has a profound impact on you. Because I had an abusive alcoholic father he's sober today, and I'm happy with that. But as a speaker before, as she said, I became what I hated the most. I couldn't hold no more grudge against him for being an abusive alcoholic father because I had harmed somebody, nearly killed someone because of my alcoholism. And so, to me, the Creator, He doesn't work in these phantasm ways to where He doesn't explain to you along the way what you're doing. Eventually, you get to see what He's doing and what He's trying to accomplish. And today, I'm happy about that. I'm very happy that my father's sober, I'm sober, and we're steadily working towards improving the community. It was an honor to come here today to get the call. And I'd like to say thank you for listening to me, and God bless.